A missing persons case on the Las Vegas Strip quickly turned into a nightmare scenario. A Utah mother accused of killing her own 11-year-old daughter inside a popular hotel and casino before turning the weapon on herself. And it all happened while this mother-daughter duo were in Vegas for a big cheerleading competition. What could have led a mother to do this to her own daughter? We're taking a look at the background. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, before we go any further into this, got to mention something. So even though it's kind of like still the start of the new year, how many of you feel burnt out? You know, it's a lot. It's a lot going on right now. And when you feel burnt out, how do you help yourself? What's self-care? Got to talk about our sponsor, Cozy Earth, okay? I will tell you, this stuff is amazing, okay? Whether it's their luxury loungewear, towels, I have their bedding. It's amazing. All of their products add indulgent, high-quality comfort to my life. I have their bamboo pajama set. It's made with a soft stretch knit that sleeps cool. You still are cozy for winter nights. Their classic cuddle blanket is like the softest thing I've ever owned. Plus, Cozy Earth has a 10-year warranty, so this comfort is going to last you a decade. So just share a little extra love this February. Wrap yourself, someone you love in comfort. Head on over to CozyEarth.com and use code LONGCRIME for up to 20% off.
The entire cheer community and cheer world was shocked to hear the tragic news of the young life lost from the Utah Extreme program.
11-year-old Addie Smith died in a Las Vegas hotel room last week, and it was reportedly at the hands of her own mother, Tanya McGeehan. They lived in the Salt Lake City area, but were in Vegas for a big cheerleading competition. But a shadow fell over the final days of the All-Star Nationals as word spread that a member of a Utah cheer group had been killed.
And to the entire Utah Extreme and Cheer Fusion program, on behalf of all of us here at JAMS, we're going to send Utah Extreme Addie's medal and a national championship jacket. We dedicate our final day of All-Star Nationals to Addie.
Tragedy struck on Sunday, February 15th, when there was concern that Addie and her mom might be missing. They hadn't shown up to the events that were being put on by JAMS Cheer and Dance. Addie and McGeehan, they were staying at the nearby Rio Hotel and Casino. Mother and daughter had checked in the day before on Saturday, and Addie's team performed that day at the competition. According to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, when the pair didn't show up for the Sunday's events, authorities and hotel management started getting calls to do a welfare check.
The details of the call are, at approximately 10:45 this morning, LVMPD dispatch received a call for service for a check the welfare of a mother and her daughter. Officers arrived, met up with security, went up to the room and attempted to contact the mother and daughter in their room. They knocked several times and they called into the room without any answer. At that point in time, without anything else and no other information and nothing else suspicious, those officers advised security and they cleared from the call. Security continued to get information from family and friends asking them to attempt to locate the mother and daughter inside the casino. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, security went back up to the room to attempt to locate the mother and child again. They knocked several times. They also called into the room without success. At that point in time, security decided to make entry into the room, where when they entered the room, they located two deceased females. They immediately backed up and called 911. Patrol arrived and secured the scene. Homicide detectives have been notified and we're currently on scene investigating the crime. It appears the preliminary details that we know so far are it appears that the mother and daughter came here for a dance competition or a cheer competition. Sometime last night, the mother shot her daughter and then shot herself.
Now, Lieutenant Price confirmed that some sort of note was found in the hotel room, although he didn't specify its contents. He also said during the news conference that no one so far had reported hearing gunshots. And as condolences poured in from cheer groups from all over the country, new details started coming to light about the background, about McGeehan's fight to keep custody of her daughter, which had apparently been ongoing since Addie was just 2 years old. Now, to be clear, as we go through this, we don't know exactly what led to this, what would cause a mother to kill her own daughter, but Just something to keep in mind as we give the context to this. So, according to Utah court records, McGeehan and her husband, Brad Smith, got divorced in 2015 and shared custody of Addie. But the relationship was reportedly tumultuous. The court had to step in to even kind of keep the peace here. In fact, things were so bad that a judge had to lay out exactly how custody swaps would even work. There are hundreds and hundreds of docket entries related to McGeehan and Smith's divorce, and most of the filings are under seal. But we got our hands on the latest decree from a Utah judge, which has details on the ex's custody arrangement, and it is very clear from those filings that the relationship between the two was acrimonious, to say the least. The documents indicate that Smith was awarded sole custody of Addie in 2020, and a judge found in October of that year that, quote, petitioner, so meaning McGeehan, is subjecting the child to behavior that is on the spectrum of parental alienation. It also states that, quote, petitioner has committed domestic abuse in the presence of the minor child. As part of that ruling, McGeehan had to be supervised by court-designated family members when she even spent time with Addie. Later on, a judge found McGeehan's behavior had improved. The custody agreement was modified to be 50-50, so 1 week on, 1 week off. According to the filing, quote, exchanges are to take place at AS's school when in session, that during times in which school is not in session, exchange will take place at the Herriman Police Department. So obviously at places where nothing bad could go down. The court documents even lay out exactly how the custody exchanges are supposed to happen. Quote, the parties are to park 5 parking stalls away from one another, and AS will walk herself to the receiving parent's car. Neither party is to videotape the child's exchanges. It almost feels like a hostage swap. According to the judge's ruling, each parent was entitled to 2 weeks of uninterrupted time with Addie during the summer when she was out of school. There were also rules for how Addie would communicate with one parent if she was staying with the other. For example, quote, during the regular parent time, each party will make AS available for FaceTime with the other parent on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. If either parent fails to initiate the call by 6:15 p.m., they shall forfeit the FaceTime call for that day. And you can tell that every little thing seemed to be a source of contention between McGeehan and Smith, and the court had to intervene on multiple occasions. All communication between Addie's parents had to be via an app specifically used in custody situations. This is according to court documents. At school events or other gatherings, the parents were forbidden from approaching one another, but at the same time, it was required that Addie be allowed to speak with whomever didn't have custody of her at that time. Both parents were also responsible for splitting the costs of any extracurricular activities like cheerleading and dance. We know that sports and hobbies like those can get expensive quite quickly, especially when it comes to things like traveling for competitions. But again, I say all that to say we do not know exactly what led to this. I will tell you, Smith's brother started a GoFundMe page to raise money for Addie's funeral expenses. On the page, he wrote, my brother Brad is facing an unimaginable loss after his daughter Addie was tragically taken from our family. This heartbreaking event has left the family in deep shock and grief, struggling to come to terms with the sudden loss of Addie in such a way. In the midst of this tragedy, we are reaching out to the community to help Brad and his family navigate the difficult days ahead. The funds raised will be transferred to Brad and go directly toward covering funeral expenses and providing much needed support for Brad and his family. With so much to process emotionally and financially, every contribution will help ease the burden and allow the family to focus on healing. Your kindness and generosity can make a real difference as they work through this painful time. Utah Extreme Cheer announced on their Facebook page that all classes were canceled for the rest of the week. Her former cheer group, Fusion Cheer, held a vigil on Monday night to remember her. Emily Morgan, who owns Utah Fusion All-Stars, coached Addie during her first year of cheer. This is according to media outlet KUTV, and she told the outlet, quote, she would learn her part. She took a lot of pride in what she was doing. As a coach, that's the dream. And because of that attitude, I always knew she was going to go far in this experience. In cheerleading, you need every single person on your team, and if they are not there, there is a void. I think that everybody feels that void, whether you're on her team right now or you've been on her team before. I want to bring on Ashton Pack, private investigator, talk about this. Ashton, this is an incredibly sad case. I do wonder, would a private investigator come into a case like this afterwards to try to, piece together aspects of this to understand what happened?
Well, it's something that could happen. I mean, ultimately, people come to guys like me after law enforcement has concluded their investigation. And sometimes, certain jurisdictions don't have the vast resources like what we have available here in Las Vegas. Yeah, sometimes there are incidents where a private investigator like myself might be able to come in and help put some things together. The problem with working on the civilian side now as a private eye is you don't have the power of the subpoena unless there's an active case going within a court where I'm working for an attorney. Law enforcement has all the tools and the resources, and it's just a matter of how much they're going to pour into a case such as this.
And this seems to be a case where it's clear what happened. What's not clear is the why. So I do
Right.
wonder whether you're an investigator working with law enforcement, you're a private investigator. How do you find out the why of something like this?
Yeah, we are obsessed with the why in this country, and I get it because what would bring a mother to do something so horrific to their daughter, to her daughter like this? And yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, homicide detective's job is to determine, what was the cause of death? Was it a homicide, which is the death by at the hands of another human? Was there a murder or a manslaughter committed? Yes, this was a murder. And ultimately, who are the perpetrators? Well, we know who the perpetrator is. This is unfortunately an open and shut case. And I'm sure there are a few things that homicide detectives will want to kind of piece together. They'll do a toxicology screening. They'll do anything that was found in the room, an analyzation of evidence that was at the scene. But it's really looking to point to see, is there anyone else that was involved with this crime, the crime of murder? And I'm pretty certain, I'm fairly certain, I never want to assume, but I can presume here that this case is going to be closed fairly quickly. But as far as motive is concerned, yeah, we might not really truly ever know. I know there was a note left. I'm sure they can piece together, some investigator could piece together through talking to family, friends, cohorts, people who were associates, as to what was going on in this person's life that would lead them to do such a horrific, violent act to their child.
Well, that's the question. I mean, how much do they look at the timeline? When was the gun? Where was the gun obtained from? When was it brought? Was there? What were the circumstances? What did the surveillance footage reveal? What were the past conversations? What was her relationship like with her ex? I mean, how much do they do? Analysis of what led up to this. Again, it's a shame if this is an open and shut case, whereas there are so many still lingering questions here.
Yeah, it just depends on it really just depends on what the bosses want the detectives to do. We live this is a large city. It's a major metropolitan American city. There's no shortage of homicides in this city. And once a case is closed, those homicide detectives are unfortunately tend to have to move on to the next case because that case is now pressing and has to be solved. So it just depends. Maybe they'll have someone in some kind of an intelligence unit do some follow up. Maybe they'll coordinate at the end of the day with some Utah law enforcement officers to see if they had any prior cases. They might put some kind of an after action report together on this, but usually homicide detectives will create just a documentation, like kind of an officer's report of what happened when there's no submittal going to the district attorney's office. There's no criminal case that's being prepared for prosecution here. The perpetrator is, taken her life at her own hands. So yeah, it just depends. It's just a big we don't know at this point, and it just kind of depends on what do the bosses at the police department want, and do we have time and resources to dedicate to a case that's pretty much solved.
Is it strange this happened in a hotel room like this?
I just think it's strange in general. What parent is parent? I'm a father. I have a daughter. I have two sons. What we as a society, this is just so perplexing to us. How could this happen? Especially a mom. Usually infanticide is at the hands of a father. And when it's a mother, it's even more compounding to us as to how this could happen. So strange that it happened at all. In a hotel room in Las Vegas, of course it's strange. It's not the usual. It's not the norm. It's just how could a mom do this to her daughter?
So, if you were hired to look into this case, where would you start? I do believe sometimes private investigators can get information that law enforcement can't. But where would you start? What would you be looking for? How would you approach a case like this to try to understand more about it?
Well, if I was hired and it was, for the determination of, hey, why did mom likely do this? Again, I'm going to provide an assessment, and that assessment is going to be based off of interviews with people. Who knew mom best? Who knew the family? Are they willing to talk to me? Are these folks willing to engage with a private investigator and give statements? At the end of the day, there was a whole cheer competition. Is anyone within that organization willing to talk? We want to understand, the motives behind this. So for me, it would be interviewing people, talking to people, trying to build rapport with those folks. And it's just time intensive. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, especially if it's just myself. Now, if I have a team of investigators, assembled, time and money is it's the only limit. How much money are you willing to spend to find out the why? And ultimately, it just takes time to assess everything, put it together in a concise report, and come up with some kind of this is what we assess with a modicum of confidence.
By the way, before we wrap things up, just one other interesting aspect is the ability of police to enter that hotel room, and there were questions surrounding that. Can you explain it?
Sure, yeah. Law enforcement came out the first time under the call was a welfare check, which is 50 times a day all over. I mean, it's one of the most common calls law enforcement will get. I got them all the time when I was a law enforcement officer. But ultimately, law enforcement has to weigh the intrusion into someone's Fourth Amendment rights to be safe in their place of where they're at. And your Fourth Amendment rights don't end when you go into a Las Vegas hotel room. So, law enforcement came out, hey, there's a welfare check. These people missed the cheer competition. We're concerned. And what is your frontline cop going to think to themselves? Oh, mom killed the daughter. It's just highly unlikely. It's more likely that, oh, they went hiking for the day and skipped out on the cheer competition. I think ultimately now the security guards, they're not law enforcement. Those are technically private citizens. They got pestered over the course of the day. Constant calls from people saying, hey, we're really worried something's not right. They make entry. That's not a Fourth Amendment issue. They're private citizens that work for the property. So that's when they went in the second time. But law enforcement has to weigh the totality of the circumstances. Do we have an exception to get there's no crime to get a search warrant for. What is our exception to the search warrant rule? We're not hearing screaming. We don't think that there's, anyone's in there needing immediate life-saving assistance. And they just probably thought to themselves, what are the odds, especially, being here in Las Vegas, a town built on odds, what are the odds that a mother would do such a horrific thing to her daughter? It was just, they didn't think that was the case of what they were dealing with.
It's impossible to predict
Yeah.
something like this. Ashton Pack, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back on.
That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also follow us on NBC's Peacock as well. We got Sidebar episodes up there as well. And if you want to follow me, check me out on Instagram, X. You can also follow my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody. I'm bringing back on forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan to go over the latest developments in the David murder case. Issues involving whether 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was ever pregnant. Was she potentially killed in Santa Barbara? Is there evidence of a cleanup? What will the defense do to fight back against maybe cause or manner of death? And if so, a lot of questions leading up to a major hearing on the horizon. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Forensics, analyzing the science, the body, the crime scene. It is the key to so many cases that we have covered here, and I think it is going to play a massive role in the David case. But I want to better understand it. I want to better understand how the potential evidence may tie to the singer. What answers are still missing? What does her autopsy, the alleged crime scene, the evidence tell us or not tell us? How is the defense going to be fighting back on this? And I'm talking, of course, about the 21-year-old romantic homicide singer charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains, all in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who was found dead, reportedly in David's Tesla at a Hollywood tow yard back on September 8th of last year. He's entered a not guilty plea. He's innocent until proven guilty. There is a preliminary hearing scheduled for May 26th, important date, because that is when the prosecution will present not all the evidence, but what they will say is sufficient evidence to support these charges to move forward with the case. But authorities say that David stabbed Celeste to death at his property to keep her quiet, that he lied in wait, that he had this alleged illegal sexual relationship with her, that she was a minor, killed her because she was a witness, that she was going to expose him, did it for financial gain, prevent her from tanking his career, which was at its peak. But again, I want to understand the forensics. Okay, I want to bring on Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, host of the Body Bags podcast. Hope everybody can check it out. Joseph's got like the best voice possible. I think in general for the podcast realm, but also particularly for that show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
You
So
bet, my friend.
I did a really super short opening so I could have a lot of time with you because I have a lot of
You bet.
questions. I don't know if you and I even talked about the medical examiner's report or the autopsy here on Sidebar. Just general impressions about that, because I do wonder, it tells us a lot, but then there's aspects of it I do wonder, how do investigators, how do authorities know this? So for example, prosecutors say in their brief, defendant stabbed the victim to death multiple times and stood by while she bled out. How do they know that?
Yeah.
How do they know that? And I also wonder specifically, if I'm correct, they don't have the murder weapon.
No, to the best of my knowledge, they don't. But back to that earlier point, how do they know that he stood there? Because look, I got to tell you, as an old investigator, you know where I get that kind of information from? It's not from the perpetrator. To say someone stands there and watches an individual bleed out, that comes from a witness. And that's the one thing that's left me scratching my head over all of this. You know how? Because that is a huge leap. If you're talking about an investigative descriptor, that is such a leap to make that affirmative statement, because I can tell you when their feet are put to the fire relative to any kind of trial that's going to come about, that question is going to be asked and it is going to have to be answered. You said in the report right here that he stood there while she bled out. So unless they have internal cameras that bore witness to this, unless there was something that was caught on a Tesla, that's the only other path I can really go down relative to that.
Unless they're just assuming this based on the idea of, look, we can say multiple penetrating wounds, right? I believe that's what they said the cause of death was, and they're saying we're putting two together, right? She allegedly came to the house at this time. We know that he allegedly sent a text to her phone 20 minutes later. We believe a sharp instrument was used, and so we are saying, of course, he stabbed her, and if he stabbed her, of course, he just waited for her to bleed out because he allegedly never called 911 or authorities, and so that's what they're assuming. But you're saying, in your experience, they shouldn't or wouldn't make that statement. There was no need to make that statement unless they have some sort of information.
Yeah, man, it's just such a huge leap, to go down that road. For me, and I'm going to tell you, that is going to have to be revealed in court. And as well as anybody, that you cannot just kind of, in some kind of pedestrian manner, just go by and say, yeah, well, this is what happened. You're going to have to explain that. I mean, because people are going to want to know. This is arguably one of the most gruesome things that we've covered in some time. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter what people think, but I think that even the court is going to want that explained. If defense looks at this and said, how do they know that? They can't just say, well, we just know. They're going to have to lay that down, the facts, right? Just like in forensic science, we like to deal with the facts. We like to deal with those absolutes. When you get inside the courtroom, you have to state the facts of the case. And this is what they're saying is a fact of the case. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how this is explained, because I don't know, man. Inquiring minds want to know, right?
This goes to another part, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I talked to Steve Fisher about this on my News Nation show. There was no cleaning supplies, right? There's no evidence that, as far as I can see in the filings, that there was this massive cleanup and luminol and things like that. And you're talking about a very graphic alleged crime, a stabbing and then dismemberment. So the reason I'm bringing this up is Steve has put forward this idea, a question about whether or not this killing happened, this alleged murder happened in the house. That she arrives 20 minutes later, he sends an alibi text. So this is from the prosecution's filing, and then I'll read you what Steve said. Despite knowing she was dead and her family was trying to find her, the evidence will show the defendant lied and claimed he didn't know where she was. In fact, the defendant drove to Santa Barbara County immediately after the victim died, attempting to dispose of her property and destroy evidence. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on April 23, 2025, he drove away from his home as he texted and called the victim's phone, asking where she was. Again, these were acts calculated and planned to set up his defense within a very short timeline after the victim's vicious murder. Defendant drove his Tesla north on the 101 freeway to San Marcos Pass Road, SR 154, near Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County. He returned home early the following morning on April 24, 2025, before going to a radio interview for the release of his album that week. He sent 2 additional texts to the victim's phone that day, which obviously went unanswered because she was already dead. After April 26, 2025, defendant never attempted to contact her again. May 8, 2025, defendant returned to the same area in Santa Barbara County, leaving his home at around 11:30 p.m. He returned to the area again on May 31st, 2025. This is an isolated site off SR 154, where the victim's identification was subsequently discovered in January 2026. Additionally, on July 7th, 2025, defendant ordered and subsequently Amazon delivered a burn cage to his home under the same fake name as part of his plan to incinerate evidence. Defendant's cellular activity and communications derived from defendant's phone and Tesla demonstrate defendant's activities from April 22nd to April 24th, including a trip to Santa Barbara in the middle of the night after the victim arrived at his Hollywood Hills home. Steve Fisher posted, "Can't stop thinking about the timeline of the murder of Celeste Rivas Hernandez," and put forward in the pre-trial brief. Could the 10:30 p.m. "where are you" text messages actually be real and not a staged alibi? Could Celeste have walked away after an argument upon arriving in the Uber? Maybe those texts from David asking where she was were real, and after he didn't receive a response, he went looking for her, found her, and they ended up driving to Santa Barbara County where the killing actually occurred. He could have shut her phone off when finding her. In that scenario, her body could have remained along SR 154 for the roughly 12 days until the pool, body bag, laundry bags, and chainsaws were ordered and delivered. It is also worth noting that the pool was ordered after her death, meaning it would not have contained blood from the actual killing. The DA's version of events is a very compressed timeline: arrival at 10:10 p.m., a fatal stabbing, and then being composed enough to send an alibi text by 10:30 p.m. That is a 20-minute window. They also claimed the trip to Santa Barbara that evening was to start disposing of evidence. However, the evidence had not even been purchased yet. The pool, chainsaw, shovel, and other items had not even been ordered at the time of the first Santa Barbara trip. There's also the question of storing a body at his manager Josh Marshall's rental house for 12 days while waiting for tools, where nearby neighbors and decomposition odors likely becoming noticeable within a few days, all while David was out of town and having to trust that nobody would enter a house that wasn't even leased to him. None of this changes the central point that David is responsible. He killed Celeste, that I am certain of. Like I said, the DA is likely correct in their theory. They are working with all the evidence. Hashtag David, hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez. So talk to me about that. I mean, in the idea of the compressed timeline, I haven't seen evidence of this massive cleanup. I do wonder, despite what the prosecution's saying, do you believe there's evidence, enough evidence, that this killing, alleged killing, happened in the house?
There was a sufficient amount of time for there to have been a cleanup affected. Okay. And here's the thing that I can't get past with that. And I think Steve has done a fantastic job. I've been on a number of platforms with him, spoken with him extensively, because he's really been the only insight that we've had, right? I mean, truly, from that perspective, because he was eyes on. And one of his big points along the way is that I can't remember if he luminoled or blue starred. He had made the statement to me, the residents in those areas, and he didn't get hit relative to anything that would indicate that there was blood in the garage. Again, we're going back to what the authorities are stating here in the affirmative, that it took place in the garage. Well, how do you know that? And it brings me back to the thought of the chainsaw. With the chainsaw, from a utility, is a very messy device to use. And it creates a storm of things of evidentiary value. So where did all of that go? I've thought about, was it the backyard perhaps? Not kind of thinking, what's more reasonable, that he would go to Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara County, I've been there a couple of times. Yeah, I mean, you can say that it's right up the road, but is it really up the road? And why would you go that far? I don't understand that. To deposit evidence or any kind of ID and things like this. I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but the other bit of evidence here is that why would you need a pool? Are you going to go out there and inflate a pool in order to facilitate this? They also talk about, in the filings, they talk about that there was bits of blue plastic that are embedded into these injuries. I can see that. I understand why there would be. A chainsaw moves at 14,000, 15,000 RPM. All right. So it's going to chew through just about anything, not just, human tissue, but if you've got an underlying kiddie pool, it's going to go through that as well. And then the idea that it would get embedded into the insults and into the injuries, it makes sense. I could see that happening. Now, the criminalists actually have those bits. That's not for the forensic pathologist to talk about tying things back relative to the forensics there. They had those bits already. Matter of fact, there was a criminalist at the scene in the car lot. They actually had a criminalist present, I think, at autopsy. They talk about at autopsy, those bits are turned over. So how are you going to go about explaining that? What's the utility of a kiddie pool out in some remote area? Why not just do it on bare earth out there? And again, thinking as a forensics guy, I'm trying to understand the utility of all of this. It seems like you're really using you in the universal sense here. You're really going a long way around the barn here in order to facilitate, the killing and dismemberment. So I honestly, I don't know. It's
Right.
it's baffling to me.
Well, look, I think the purchase history is quite damning for him. Look, he's innocent until proven
Yeah.
guilty, but the idea of they can track the purchases and when he allegedly made these purchases and what the items were and when
Yes.
they arrived, and if they're able to allegedly track his movements and the Santa Barbara, the cell phone. But I think the idea also, and I thought this was significant, the filing says that he lied to friends, business associates, and others about the strong smell of decay in and around the home and the car. And TMZ published this video, and I don't know if it's going to be a part of evidence, but I thought it was significant that it was reportedly from July 4th, 2025, a live stream. So it was, again, a few months after the alleged murder. And
Yeah.
according to a prosecutor brief, that was only a few weeks later, July 29th, when, quote, the surveillance video and other evidence confirm defendant was the last person to drive the vehicle on July 29th, 2025, before he left Los Angeles on a concert tour. Not entirely clear, maybe someone else could have picked up the car. But anyway, in this clip, David appears to be with Neil Langston, appears to be with someone named Sukana, and he apologizes for the way his bathroom smells, says it was because he had gone to the bathroom 2 hours earlier. I mean, could very well be it, but if there was potentially this smell, it does beg the question about, how that factors into this case.
What my question is this, all right, what would be the purpose of even making that statement? Is that a statement that someone would actually make, about, I mean, I don't know, maybe you feel comfortable around the crowd that you're around. So if that's the case, okay, good on him. He's trying to explain a bad odor, but had he ever done that before? And also there is a gulf of difference between a bathroom smell and the smell of a child decomposing, a gulf. All right. And so is that an attempt to explain this odor away? And think about it, Jesse, is that smell, people think that they have smelled bad things. All right. And I guess you can scale that out any number of ways. If you've never been around decomposing remains, it's a smell that kind of haunts you. Even me, at this stage of my life, I still recall it instantaneously. It's something you don't forget. And it is completely different than a smell that would emanate from a bathroom. It was just an odd statement. I actually heard this video, and it seemed kind of out of place for me. And anybody could read anything they want to into that. It was very bizarre. And again, we're taking a random statement out of the air. We don't know what other statements had been made at that period of time,
Right.
but TMZ chose that slice and they put it out there. Now, whether or not that would make it into court, I don't know, but I can tell you everybody that's contained in that video, I think, is subject to be subpoenaed. Because if that's what was being said, they can just be put on the stand and say, did you ever smell a foul odor in that house in any way? And ask that question over and over and over again. I don't know how many times they would allow that, what witnesses there are. I saw that there was a young lady in that video. I don't know who she is.
Sukana,
And then you've got the other gentleman who's supposed to be the personal assistant, which, if you watch him, in that clip, he never cracks a smile and he just kind of looks up like that. I think people use that term, the side eye essentially is what he did. He was kind of expressionless when that's it. It's intriguing. I mean, it truly
Yeah.
is.
And
Yeah,
the timing of it, like in that time frame, I think is interesting as well. You know, Joseph,
very much so.
one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about, and I have a lot more I want to get into,
Sure.
the autopsy, right? I mean, look, from a legal point of view, the significance of that, in any case, you have to establish as an element of the crime that someone was killed. And so
Yeah.
the
Yeah, you
autopsy,
do.
you know, you're going to have the medical examiner testify and talk about the cause of death, the manner of death. Talk to me, though, about how what you read may actually tie back to David. So there's the significance of the report. We were all waiting for the report. It was sealed for months and months and months. What is the thing that stood out to you the most about it? And also, how do you think it may potentially be used to actually tie back?
Yeah, let's break that down in categories. First off, let's start with the big piece to this, and that's going to be, I think, the most glaring thing, and they'll see crime scene images of this, is the level of decomposition, how advanced she was. Okay. And you can talk about that, which it's well stated in the autopsy report. You can talk about in what an advanced state of decomposition she's in. And that's really going to assault the senses of the jury here. Okay. They also talk about liquefaction, which is something we haven't really, heard before. In this case, how the remains are partially liquefied. And that's going to be a place where I think the defense, I'm always thinking about what the defense could do. They can step in and say, well, you're saying the body is partially liquefied. How can you actually identify, these insults, these injuries? Well, they were able to identify that to a great degree. And so part one is they're going to talk about the status of her body and also how the body is in multiple elements and it's bagged separately, which is something that's intriguing. I'd love to go back to the body bag and talk about that, because that, on an aside, that's a fascinating element to me. But let's make it through the rest of these. Then you get down to the nature of the cause of death, and they're saying that this is a sharp force event. They didn't say, which is not unusual. I don't think that they alluded to whether this is a single-edged or double-edged weapon. I'm assuming, which is dangerous to do, it's a single-edged weapon. And if our friends that are listening will just understand where these two insults are, I think that's important for folks to understand. Jesse, you and I have talked so many times over the past decade, about multiple injuries. And when you hear multiple, most of the time, and how many times have you and I talked about overkill, right? Mm-hmm. This doesn't fit in that category. They're talking about two lethal injuries here. And I question the lethality of one of these injuries. I know specifically the other one is very lethal. But let's start on the left aspect, where Celeste had sustained a sharp force injury in between her ribs. All right. And that's what's called the intercostal space. There's muscles. If you've ever worked out, folks have ever worked out and you've pulled an intercostal muscle, it's one of the most painful things you can ever injure. It's that space between your ribs, and that is muscle. Well, it passes through there, and it doesn't really affect the lung. And it's hard to tell because she's in such an advanced state. I don't know if the lung was collapsed as a result of natural decompositional process, or if it may have been collapsed. But they don't even talk about, that this sharp instrument nicked the lung. What they do talk about, and this is very important from a forensic standpoint, is that blade actually passes over the cortex, or the outer layer of the rib. Now, what can we draw from that? Well, you can get a tool mark off of that. And I'm hoping that they retain that sample, because the pathologist goes into some explanation about that piece of rib. All right. And that's something that is commonly done in forensics labs, where once that bit of tissue, that rib, that bone, is cleaned up, it would go to a tool mark examiner, and they'll do a gross examination. That means they're looking at it with an unaided eye. They'll put it on a magnification scope, look at it there. And what they're going to look for is any kind of specific impression that goes across that rib, and they can actually classify the edge that would have created that. Now, onto the lethal injury. If folks will find the bottom of the right aspect of your rib cage, your liver is right there. So you find the last rib on the right side and press in where the tissue is soft. That's your liver. All right. And you got to go through the dome of the diaphragm, essentially right there. But the liver is underlying. This injury is, I think, and I'm just doing this off the top of my head, so forgive me. I think it's 2 inches approximately in depth, but it's enough to nick the liver. And this goes back to the earlier statement we talked about with the bleeding out. The liver next to the brain is the most vascular organ in the body. I've had tons of liver injuries over the course of my career, gunshot wounds, stab wounds, motor vehicle accidents. And it is not a quick death. Just so everybody understands this. This is not like a gunshot wound to the head or even a bludgeoning or even a strangulation. Okay. So if someone is stabbed in this area, in the liver, you don't die instantly. This would have been a very protracted event if that's the only injury that there was that had a level of lethality. Now, did they miss anything, which is possible, because of the level of decomposition? Okay. Right now, I'm not thinking so. Okay. So that's an important part of this. And this goes back to the watching, doesn't it, Jesse? Right. This is an observable event. Watched her bleed out. And again, that's a very affirmative statement, that they're making. And it fits with, for me, it does with this liver insult, because that is a location where it would take a protracted period of time to die.
Right. I go back to something that you said before is, they'll make question, the defense may question, how can you definitively determine cause of death given the level of dismemberment and decomposition? What kind of expert do you think the defense would call to negate this? They've been very.
They're going to have a forensic pathologist.
Yeah, and how would that person dispute the official findings? Because again, the defense says he's not the cause of her death. There seems to be a dispute here. What room is there going to be for a forensic expert to disagree with the official findings?
I think that the one thing about it is you're going to have a forensic pathologist that has a very strong background. Most do, all right, in decomposed bodies. But you're going to have a defense pathologist that can at least insert that seed for reasonable doubt relative to the level of decomposition. I think that that's really the only intellectual underpinning that you have. If you're trying to make that argument that you guys do in court, right? That's where you're going to go. They're going to have to lean into the decomposition. I know that sounds so bizarre, but for me, there's so much other evidence, digital evidence, circumstantial evidence, testimonial stuff that's going on, in addition to the physical evidence that they have. This is a mountain. I mean, it's a mountain. I've seen, cases with much less forensic evidence that have not gone well for the defendant. Decomposition, though, is going to be the big factor here, I think, and you're going to hear a lot about it. I think you're going to hear a lot about entomology in this case, because this goes back to, I talked to Steve about this too. The entomology element here is going to be a big part, because, and forgive me, and certainly our listeners too. I don't mean to be insulting or be ghastly here.
It's important to talk about.
But with entomology, flies have a life cycle. Okay, and I promise you, dollars to donuts. All right. Within that period of time that she died, I'd say probably within 5 hours. Okay. Flies are already aware. So, and there it begins, and flies always find a way. There's nothing you can do to keep away flies, period, end of paragraph. So what they'll do is that they lay that little clutch of eggs that they all start off with. And that's where this timeline begins to tick, because maggots and flies both have cycles that they run through, and they're kind of set in stone. and that goes to timing, right? So you can have a body where you will have multiple generations of fly. The longer you go out, all right, and the longer there is viable tissue for them to, consume, you're going to have flies. And so what they'll do is the entomologist, and I hope they did this both at the car. Remember, in that statement that was released in that earlier document dump, when they opened that trunk, they observed insect activity there in the trunk.
Yeah.
Okay. My question is, are there any maggot husk or anything indicative of that body being placed somewhere on that property? Okay, in the Hollywood Hills. And, with an entomologist, that's an easy lift for them because they would go out and inspect that area. They would see the husk that are there. That's going to be a big part to that as well. You're also going to see tool mark evidence. The pathologist makes note, they allude, and I'm paraphrasing here, they allude to kind of how cleanly these marks were made. Pathologists can kind of testify to that, but you really want a heavy hitter to come in the tool mark area. I'm just building out the team.
I remember they said multiple linear cuts when it came to the pool, They talked about that.
and then we talk about the dismemberment of the body.
Right.
You marry that up with that, and these edges are very clean as they can be. And so that I've always felt as though when I heard that, and before I heard the chainsaw that they used, they said this was a chainsaw. I knew that this was going to have to be a mechanical device that was utilized here. This is not, going out to the shed and grabbing your dad's, old carpenter saw.
Well, there's one more thing I want to get to with you, but
Sure.
The idea that you have this then 20-year-old singer murder her, buy the tools, dismember her, and seemingly, all by himself because no one else has been implicated, no one else has been arrested, no one else has been charged. It's quite a thing to be thinking about. And it goes to this final point, pregnancy. So this is a big issue that's come up. And the reason that this has come up is because in the prosecution's pretrial brief, they wrote text exchanges between the victim and defendant contain references to sex, pregnancy, abortion, and use of the Plan B emergency contraceptive. There are also explicit photographs documenting and corroborating their sexual relationship. In November 2024, defendant and the victim broke up, although they continued to communicate, and text messages suggest they also continued to have sexual relations. And then just a few days ago, well, actually now maybe a little bit longer, maybe last week, her death certificate was amended to suggest it was unclear if she was pregnant when she was killed. In other words, it was changed from not pregnant to unknown. Now, you and I spoke on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, and you believe, right, the idea is because of the investigative findings, they have no choice but to make it unknown, right? Because here's the thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, about what the autopsy report says, but if prosecutors believe she was pregnant, I have to imagine they would have included it in their filings because you're talking special circumstances allegations. What better way to prove that? What better way to prove motive, prove he silenced the witness, killed her for financial gain, than if she were pregnant? If she's pregnant with his child, you would include that. You would say this is definitive proof. I mean, how compelling would that be? They don't include that. So talk to me about what we're missing here, because, if the report is now saying unknown, and yet have you seen any evidence to suggest that she was pregnant?
No, and as a matter of fact, I'm scrolling through the autopsy report right now for me, and this is something I'm so glad you asked me this, so thank you, because if I'm disappointed in anything in this particular case and with the autopsy and kind of what's being explained and what's not being explained, for my money, here's the troubling bit. When doctors, and I think probably even attorneys, but specifically doctors, when doctors do a dictation, of their reports, all right, just follow what I'm saying. Give me a little bit of rope here.
For sure.
So when they're dictating, there are certain things in law and medicine that if you're going to cite something, or if you're going to, and it's not necessarily significant, but it is significant, they will say to the person that's on the other end, if they're just taping this, they'll say standard dictation insert, standard dictation insert. Jesse, my friend, if you'll go back and you'll look at this autopsy, as a matter of fact, if you wish, I can actually read it for you right now, because I got to tell you, when I'm seeing this, it looks like when it comes to the part of the autopsy report, I think that they went with standard dictation. And this is how the header is. The header is female reproductive tract, uterus, present, not enlarged, without endometrial lesions and hemorrhage, ovaries, fallopian tubes, appropriate for age, without lesions, breast tissue, without lesions, other reproductive tract findings. That's what you're giving me? We're talking about a case where if you've got a child who has been engaged in allegedly sexual congress with a grown man, I think that one of the big questions here, I need more detailed information. You've been able to do this assessment on the uterus and say it's not enlarged, but that requires a deeper dive. When you look at this document, there's no like, we have dissected the uterus, we've gone through layer by layer, and these are our findings. Okay. It just like, wow, it's striking, when you see it. I really hate if this is the truth, because as it turns out, this is going to be one of the big things that this whole investigation, this whole future trial, when and if it happens, it's going to come down to.
Yeah.
Because as you stated, this is motivation, right?
Yeah.
That's a central key. Granted, I know we don't have to prove motive, but if you're trying to understand something, I find that section itself wanting.
Well, it's important, again, to prove the special circumstances. I mean, that is kind of the why. It's right, the lying
You're on the
in
money.
wait. It's the financial gain. It's killing a witness. So there is an aspect of that they do have to prove. Look, Joseph, I appreciate you being so generous with your time
Sure.
on this and laying all this out. Thank you so much. I really wanted to have a discussion with you about this because we didn't have a full, in-depth breakdown of this the way that it needs to be conducted. So thank you so much. Good seeing you, my friend, and hope
Good to
everybody
see
can
you
check
too,
out
brother.
Body Bags.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody. A former model who appeared in Playboy and Penthouse is now having to pose for a mugshot after Los Angeles officials say she lured older men out on dates and then robbed them. That's the accusation. After months of encouraging Southern Californians to be on the lookout for her, the DA now says she'll finally have to answer for her alleged crimes. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so we first told you about 28-year-old Adva Levy, who sometimes uses the stage name Mia Ventura, last fall. Now, Los Angeles County law enforcement apparently put out a bulletin with what appears to be her driver's license photo, as well as these details about the car she drove, a black Porsche SUV, a white Mercedes-Benz sedan. But now we're getting new details from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office about Levy's alleged crimes and when she could face a judge and jury. So, according to the DA's office, between 2023 and 2025, Levy is accused of using dating apps to cultivate relationships with wealthy older men and younger women, all in the Westlake Village, West Hollywood, Los Angeles, and Beverly Hills areas, that she allegedly gained access to their homes by posing as a girlfriend or a travel companion, and then she's accused of stealing cash and gold and high-end designer items. So she has been charged with 6 felony counts right now. 2 counts of unauthorized use of personal identifying information, 2 counts of grand theft, 1 count of first-degree residential burglary, 1 count of first-degree residential burglary with person present. Los Angeles DA Nathan Hochman said in a statement, quote, "At her trial, we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant exploited trust built through online relationships to gain access to victims' homes and steal from them. Her ability to deceptively influence others, whether in person or online, has now come to an end. Our office is committed to holding accountable anyone who uses deception and manipulation to prey on others." And according to the DA's office, Levy faces up to 11 years, 8 months in state prison if she's convicted on all those counts. So it's really, the stakes are high. She's entered a not guilty plea. She's scheduled to be arraigned at the Van Nuys courthouse on April 6th. For now, she's out of custody with an ankle monitor. This is per the court docket. She's been ordered to stay away from the alleged victims in this case. And apparently, it's not just Southern California where Levy is accused of running her schemes. According to reporting from ABC7, police reports have been filed against Levy in Nevada, Florida, France, Italy. One of the first people to speak publicly about Levy's alleged sticky fingers, was a podcaster named Michael Sartain, host of Access Vegas. He told Los Angeles news outlet KTLA that Levy was a guest of on an episode of his show, and at some point, according to him, Levy went into the green room and stole the credit cards and the cash from the purses of all the then female panelists. She then apparently returns to be part of the panel, and that she was, quote, cool as a cucumber. Told ABC7, quote, she basically sits there for 90 minutes having stolen everyone's credit cards and everyone's cash out of their purses in the green room, just the female guests, and just sat there, cool as a cucumber, just talking about the election while she had everyone's stuff in her purse just sitting right behind her. Now, one of the women who was allegedly victimized told KTLA that Levy tried to charge multiple things to her stolen American Express credit card, including an expensive hair appointment at a Beverly Hills salon. The victim did some investigating apparently on her own and says she found out that Levy had allegedly booked the appointment under the name Mia Ventura. Another alleged victim spoke with the Los Angeles Times back in December about her experiences with Levy. Quote, Amber Karis Bassick, an international lingerie and swimwear model, she told the Times that Levy befriended her, invited her on an all-expenses-paid trip to Ibiza, but that all-expenses-paid part turned out to be too good to be true, because Bassick claims that when she got to the hotel, it wasn't paid for. So she had to pay more than $2,000 to check in. And then when Levy shows up, she was being followed by a taxi driver who was demanding to be paid. Now, Levy apparently told Bassick that her American Express wasn't working in Europe, so Bassick would have to pay the driver. From there, Bassick claims they would be out all night trying to attract older men to pay for their food and their drinks. She also claims that Levy would take photos of men's credit cards. Quote, I thought this trip was a girl's trip to make content, but for Levy, the whole trip was just to use me to attract her next victims. All she wanted to do was hunt for rich older men. Hey, by the way, we're well into 2026, and I will tell you, it feels like each day AI is getting more efficient at our jobs, right? So the question is, are you just going to watch this shift happen, or are you going to learn to win from it? I'm going to let you in on a product that is completely free and has changed the lives of millions of AI learners. Outskill. It is the first ever AI-focused educational platform, and they're hosting a 2-day AI mastermind training live this Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. This 16-hour AI training condenses the experiences of tech companies that built themselves up through the AI boom. Now, there are a lot of AI experts out there, but Outskill is genuinely interested in helping you make an impact at work and also increasing your earning potential. You'll learn to build AI agents to execute for you, automate workflows, connect tools, get a boost at work with the hours you'll save. You'll also get the AI Prompt Bible, the AI Profit Roadmap, a personal AI toolkit builder. And if you register right now, you'll get their 2026 AI Hackbook. This is a guide to AI shifts and steps to take to be prepared. Their 4.9 out of 5 Trustpilot rating proves they have a track record of impressing learners. So click the link in the description or scan the QR code and join our WhatsApp community to stay up to date. Now, Levy herself has apparently responded to some of the allegations against her. The Daily Mail reached out to her after that special bulletin was released, and she said that she hadn't heard about the accusations until they called. According to the Daily Mail, Levy told them over the phone, I think when you probably hang out with someone really powerful and someone really connected, if you piss them off, it's problematic because they can really bleep you over. But when the Daily Mail pushed for more details about this apparent scheme, she reportedly hung up on them. So what else do we know about her? What else do we know about Levy? Well, she's appeared on the cover of Playboy, was chosen as the Penthouse Pet of the Month in July of 2023. 2022, a news release from Clubhouse Media Group announced that she was joining Honey Drip, which is kind of a rival to OnlyFans. And according to that release, Levy is from Israel. She served in the IDF for 2 years. After her service, she worked as a flight attendant. This is again according to Clubhouse Media Group, but the COVID-19 pandemic grounded planes worldwide and she was laid off. And the release says that she shifted her focus to growing her social media following and working as a model. What do we make of this? What can we expect? Philip Dubé is with us, former LA County Deputy Public Defender. Thank you so much for taking the time, sir. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Jesse. How are you?
Good. What do we make of these charges? Which were the ones, if you are defending her, you say, this is the ones I want to focus on the most, this is the one that I'm concerned about the most, or you say they group them all together, all or nothing?
Well, legally, I think the most serious charge is the first-degree residential burglary for several reasons. Number one, it can carry up to 6 years in state prison, and you'd have to serve 85% of it. Number two, she is not an American citizen. And under federal immigration law, it could be deemed to be an aggravated felony, in other words, a crime of violence, and it would render her deportable. So she would be on a one-way slow boat back to Tel Aviv. So as a criminal defense attorney, we have to not only protect their criminal legal interests under due process, but there's an extra obligation and an extra duty to protect their immigration status. So we have to do whatever we can to allow them to remain in the country.
Now, by the way, according to the court docket, she has hired private counsel to defend her, so it doesn't appear that she's going to be using a public defender. But either way, what are the first steps you would take in building a defense? Because I do wonder, what is the evidence they have against her, right? Do you think it's surveillance? Do you think it's what was allegedly in her possession? Was it the idea of, hey, we can track, let's say, credit cards to where they were purchased and where they were used? I mean, what do you think they have against her right now?
First of all, she has very competent defense counsel. She's represented by Jeffrey Rubenstein. I believe his office is in Beverly Hills. And I've never met Mr. Rubenstein, but he certainly doesn't work for free. And by the way, I tell private attorneys this all the time. When you're representing any client charged with what we call a paper crime, meaning involving high finance, a lot of money, prosecutors can bring a civil forfeiture action and essentially disgorge you of your attorney's fees that you are paid if they can show that they came from an ill-gotten source. So if that money was taken by her and she used that money to pay her attorney could end up working for free. Now, having said that, if I were defending her, again, the first line of attack would be the residential burglary. In order to convict, not to hold her to answer to stand trial, because that's a probable cause standard, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had the intent to either commit a felony or to steal before entering the home.
Right.
So, right? So
in other words, if she just went to the house, hung out, and then while she's there, she's like, oh, this looks nice, and takes it, that wouldn't be burglary?
As an afterthought, no, it is not. Assuming they can prove that you had that intent before you entered and you went there under the guise of just wanting to hook up, befriend lonely hearts, that kind of thing, well, then that might be enough circumstantial evidence to get her. But if it's a mere afterthought that she got there, they were having a good time, and then she starts looking around and she sees a really cool bracelet laying on a nightstand or a piece of jewelry or even a wad of cash, and then takes it, doesn't mean she's innocent. It just means it's not burglary.
So, Philip, again, what do you think would be the evidence? How would they prove it? Would it be, there's a strength in numbers if you're talking about multiple alleged victims, multiple instances. Is that how you get to intent? Is that how you get to what maybe she was allegedly up to? Because again, it's kind of it's such an interesting case on so many different levels, but you think about the overlap of the charges, the overlap of the instances, and how you prove that intent factor.
Well, it depends on the charge. So, for example, if it's, let's say, unlawful access card use, meaning illegal use of credit cards, if she's using an alias, let's say, at the time of purchase, she's lying about who she is, then that's obviously circumstantial of an intent to defraud or to deceive.
That's like unauthorized use of personal identifying information?
Correct. We call that a 484E out here. And it's a very common crime where you get a hold of either a mislaid or a stolen credit card. You try to pass it off as yours, make a purchase, but then you sign a bogus name on it, or you give some false circumstances as to how you got the card. That shows an intent to deceive and an intent to defraud. Now, as to burglary, certainly when you have sort of a group of victims who are coming in that have absolutely no nexus to one another, saying that this she-devil has done this to me as well. She gets into my house under the guise of wanting to go out on a date, wanting to hook up, but in fact, she's rummaging through drawers when I run to the kitchen to pour her a drink, or if I run to the men's room, she's opening up closets or going through my drawer, doing whatever, then that is certainly circumstantial evidence of an intent to steal. But what else does it prove? I think there's an argument to be made that circumstantially she had that intent before entry. You have too many people ganging up on her who have fallen prey to her to say, no, that this was an after acquired intent.
What did you make of her statement, her alleged statement she made to the Daily Mail that she's being, it seemed that she was saying that she was being falsely accused, falsely targeted because she got on somebody's wrong side. Is that a defense? And then she hung up apparently when asked more about it, which, I mean, that's her right to do, but I don't know. I'm assuming that might come into evidence maybe, but also, does it give you a kind of an idea about a defense there?
Depends on how credible she comes off. If she takes the stand and says, look, uh, I admit, maybe I took advantage of people. I didn't like them after the first date. It didn't work out, but nonetheless, they showered and plied me with extravagant gifts. They wined and dined me. They're just sore losers that I wasn't interested, that I didn't want a second date. And I think there's an argument to be made that that's true. I mean, how many people hook up on these dating websites? The whole purpose is to date. It doesn't work out, so you move on to the next one, and hopefully you find your soulmate. Now, after a while, it's going to start to build and build and build, like building blocks of guilt, because you're going to have too many people saying that after or on the first date, she entered my home and ripped me off. So I don't think that that's necessarily a disgruntled sore loser or somebody who is regretting going on that first date. It sounds like somebody who is truly a victim of crime.
I think it'll be tough to get a fair and impartial jury in a case like this as a defense attorney because not that everybody would know about the case, but what she's accused of, how she appears, how she presents herself. I wonder if that could be tough, optics and also, these accusations, they can be tough. They can be tough to find a fair and impartial jury, right?
Well, all that really matters during jury selection is that you can get from the veneer panel that nobody has formed a final opinion. If nobody, despite what they may have read about the case or heard about the case, as long as they have not reached a final judgment or conclusion about her, I think you can find 12 jurors who can be fair and impartial. That even though we are so enmeshed in the true crime world every day, there are plenty of people out there just living their lives who have no idea who the heck she is.
Right.
And frankly, let's be honest, particularly here on the west side of LA and in the San Fernando Valley, where she's going to be tried, we have a large Jewish and Israeli community who might actually be sympathetic to her. I'm not going to necessarily call them woke or inclined to let people go merely because they are from Israel. But I think that there is going to be some common ground, if you will, and they might cut her some slack and never think that one of their own could ever do this.
I imagine jurors have to be asked, did you see her cover fold or did you ever watch her online? I mean, if that's really the service she was a part of, they are asked about that, right?
Course, and then the court can excuse them for cause. Because if you can tell during the voir dire process that they have formed a final opinion, that she is a vixen, a villainess, a thief, a conniver, a grifter, then because they have formed that final opinion based on media accounts, the judge is going to kick them for cause.
Okay. By the way, do you think this is going to actually move forward towards a trial? I know you're not part of the case, you don't know all the evidence, but is this one of those situations where if you are dealing with more black and white evidence, if you can show I don't know all that they have, but if it's easy to show or relatively easy to prove unauthorized use of personal identifying information, or you can, if there's surveillance footage or credit card receipts, what have you, is this a kind of case where you think a deal might be worked out, and what would a deal look like?
If I were representing her, and I have actually verified that she is not a U.S. citizen, let alone have a green card or lawful status in the United States, I would try to work out a deal where she serves 364 days or less to a non-violent and to a non-aggravated felony under federal law. Because what that would do is, yes, she would be convicted and she would have a felony. She would be ordered to pay restitution, but it does not automatically render her deportable. So she would still have a right to a hearing in the immigration courts to preserve her right to remain in the country. That's how I would try to fashion a deal. Now, on the other hand, if she doesn't want to do any time, and doesn't care about her immigration status, then you can either just plead her out and maybe get her straight probation to the burglary and off she goes, or you do the trial. But I can tell you now, given where she's going for her trial, if she's convicted, she's going to prison.
Two points about that. Why do you say that? I don't know that trial. And number two, I don't know that court. And two, you said federal charge, aren't these state charges?
These are state charges, but when you are convicted of certain state crimes, it triggers federal immigration law.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, and federal immigration law defines certain types of offenses that render you deportable.
Gotcha.
For example, certain types of aggravated residential burglary where the homeowner is actually home at the time. We call it a hot burg. If the victim is actually present during the time of the burglary, it is an inherently dangerous felony.
Of course.
Because there's this assumption you could use violence to try to thwart the burglar, or that the burglar might try to use violence against the victim. So you're rendered deportable.
Why is that court, you said if she goes to trial in that court, she's looking at prison time. Why do you say that?
Well, I can tell you that just based on my experience in going to trial in the San Fernando Valley, when you don't take a deal and your exposure is almost 11 years, you're not going to get straight probation when you have this many victims. I mean, this type of ruse and this type of advantage that the defendant has taken over multiple victims who were vulnerable, who fell easy prey to somebody who was this cunning and manipulative, has to be punished. Otherwise, you will never deter this type of behavior. And at that point, her immigration concerns are going to be the least of her problems. She will be going to the big house.
Philip Dubé, love having you on. You break it down so easily for us to understand, especially California law and what happens out in Los Angeles. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
It was all mine. Be well.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.
अलफ अलागी ज़ात तू ऐ झोर सदकै जेड़ो कुल कायनात चलाण आलो अलफ अलागी ज़ात तू झोर सदकै जेड़ो कुल कायनात चलाण आलो हुक्म उस गै बाजना पतर अल्लाह ओ तेरो मेरो वजूद बनाण आलो 18,000 मखलूक गो ऐ मालिक सुनो रब सुनो जमीन आसमान आलो अर्श फर्श लो कलम महफूज कुर्सी जिया जून ना रिज़क खिलाण आलो दाल दुखांगी गल सो नौरे तमना एक बच्ची मासूम रोलाओ गई है दाल दुखांगी गल सो नौरे तमना एक बच्ची मासूम रोलाओ गई है ओ उसकी मारे गुलनाज है बहुत दुखिया ये मारा सीना माँ बर छिलाओ गई है नाओ बच्ची गो अफसा में मूद सोनो रोग उमरा गो सुनी लाओ गई है ओ जिला पुणछ गिरा शिंदरा सोनो अय दुखिया दिलाना अफजारो लाओ गई है दाल दर्द जो दयागा आई बोते ओ खाए पर बचागी नारे जो दई ओवे दाल दर्द जो दयागा आई बोते ओ खाए पर बचागी नारे जो दई होवे ओ माना सबर करार फिर नहीं रहा तो दख्ते जिगर की जद जो दई होवे ते बाप उसको मैं मुँह दियो सेन दुखिया अफसा जही बची सिने लाई होवे ओ दुख मुझ जावेद माँ बाप नावे ओ बचा किसे ही नारे जो दई होवे तेरे हो रब गा करम तमाम होए आस्तारा अप्रैल ना खुशी भरपूर होई रे हो रब गा करम तमाम होए आस्तारा अप्रैल ना खुशी भरपूर होई ओ अल्लाह पाक ने दिती एक बच्चियो सोनी अय गुनाह करांगी अर्ज मंजूर होई दिन माँ दाखिल रही महारात अय 10 बजे ऑपरेशन होयो ते टेंशन दूर होई ओ दीती खबर फिर आनी उन डॉक्टरां ने होगी बची पर बड़ी कमजोरी होई सलाह दीती वीर डॉक्टर है कमजोर बची ले गए बीच मशीन रखाओ दीती सलाह दीती डॉक्टर है कमजोर बची ले गए बीच मशीन रखाओ दीती 18-19 तक रखी पुणछ अंदर और फिर इकी नर जोरी कराओ दीती आई रात 9 बजे मामू आई नानी दोए गड्डी तरफ जोरी चलाओ दीती ओ मासा देरी ना लाई ले चल गया ओ 12 बजे जोरी पहुंचाओ दीती किसना चैन सकून फिरे ऐ उस दिन तो रस्ता बिच डाडा परेशान होया ऐ किसना चैन सकून फिरे ऐ उस दिन तो रस्ता बिच डाडा परेशान होया रात 12 बजे रजोरी पुजया कि जल्दी डॉक्टरा कोल रवान होया ऐ डॉक्टर नब्ज तके मुतू ये बोल न सके असली राज तू बे वो हैरान होया ओ अमानत रब की है तम सबर करियो ए आपसा बची गारू वे रवान होया किसना होश रे ओ सुनी ये खबर जिस दम आया है आप जायमना छोड़ गई है ऐ किसना होश रे ओ सुनी ये खबर जिस दम आया है आप जायमना छोड़ गई है ये एम्बुलेंस करी वापस पुणच चलना मारी किस्मत अज मुख रे मोड़ गई है आई गुल नाज वाणी अरे ए मान बाकी मेरी खुशी ना किंगा तू रोड़ गई है दाखिल बीच अस्पताल थी पुणछ अंदर हे मांगुल नाज गो दिल क्यों तोड़ गई है अप्रैल बईना सुबह गए ऐ 5 बजे वतन शींदरा पुजे आयान सदके अप्रैल बईना सुबह गए ऐ 5 बजे वतन शींदरा पुजे आयान सदके ये माना 10 बजे एम्बुलेंस आने कि तेरा तकन गाय अफजायर मान सदके ते कितना दुख था महंगा है काल जामा जाने वाया रब रहमान सदके और वे बाप महमूद परवेज नानी नाले रोवे सजाद यवान सदके कफन दफन गोविलो हुणे यार के ओ इना दुखाना हुण मीटौरे किसरा कफन दफन गोविलो हुणे हार के ओ इना दुखाना हुण मीटौरे किसरा ओ जीता मांगे बचा गो टूर जानो इस शेर बर कलम चनो किसरा ते अच्छा रब वाले हुणे है छोड़ गई है तीना सिना नालू हुण लऊं किसरा सबर या तो नी दिल में याद तेरी रोता दिला ना चुप करूं किसरा फिया मान इना दुखाने है मुकणो नी 4 बजे रे आपका दफनाओ छोड़ी है फिया मान इना दुखाने है मुकणो नी 4 बजे रे आपका दफनाओ छोड़ी वतन पुणच गिराशी दराय अंदर ओ सोनी निकी जी कबर बनाओ छोड़ी सबर करियो महमूद गुल नाज दोए मानत रब गी रब ने छुपाओ छोड़ी ओए फिया मान जावे तू इजाजत ले ले जख्म मोड़ी भी क्यों रे दुखाओ छोड़ी